This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Mayor Wharton grapples with the pension problem. Governor Haslam makes a bold promise about education, and 13 schools in Shelby County are on the chopping block. All that and more coming up on Behind the Headlines. Welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Pierre Kimsey, sitting in for Eric Barnes. Joining me today is Jackson Baker of the Memphis Flyer, Bill Dries of the Memphis Daily News, and Les Smith of Fox 13 News. Well, this week we were faced with a range of issues, from wine in the grocery stores to school closings, but we start off the program with Memphis Mayor A.C. Wharton's State of the City address. In it, he talked about the looming pension problem, and Les Smith was there. What were some of his proposals?
January 29th seems so long ago right now. Actually, it was an interesting and upbeat speech delivered January 29th at a very unique site in the auditorium at the University of Memphis Law School, which I thought was very nice and seemed to fit the situation. 35-minute speech that basically came down to the moniker of potholes to poverty. That expanded through 5 P's that he picked out, and of course one of them was indeed pensions, which is a big discussion. This pension is our pension situation. City employees is going to add like $100 million to what they're going to have to determine for fiscal year 2015. So it's about 142 million or something like that, which they're saying right now they're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. But what he didn't deal with and refuses to say is the word taxes. He will not go there. I mean, it seems obvious to everybody I talk to, you're talking $140 million. You should be able to say, look, you're going to get taxed, or else we're going to be cutting into public safety. We're going to be doing all these things, tightening the belts and efficiency and all that. But just say the word taxes, because that's what's going to come. And I think he needs to be honest with people in that regard. And a lot of, I thought very ironic too, was that people remembered 4 of the P's, but they forgot the 5th, which is plan. and that's pretty significant, because with the Wharton administration, that P word, planning, sometimes goes astray.
Well, you remember his line, we have become so tomorrow-minded, we've forgotten about the immediacy of today. Yeah. He doesn't make plans.
That's right, he doesn't make plans.
Well, there is one line from the speech that I have here, and he's talking about the proposal that he has for the pensions, the pension itself. And he says what this means is that we must go to a model in which the city of Memphis and its taxpayers are not the ultimate guarantors of what the pension should be, regardless of the market. And what is he referring to there, Bill?
He means that city employees are going to be called on to make a sacrifice, and it's going to be a much larger sacrifice that's going to venture into public safety. It's going to venture into the 2 largest divisions in city government that account for the largest part of the budget, the police and fire departments. And that's where we've gone since the State of the City address. The mayor and the council are now starting to engage in what do we do about public safety. The fire department has had cuts, but we're talking about possibly more cuts for the fire department, although Wharton has said that will be much more difficult than dealing with the police, whose budget has actually increased over the last 4 or 5 years.
There was some talk that early on, both Alvin Benson, Fire Services Director, and Tony Armstrong appeared briefly for about 2 minutes each a couple of weeks ago in front of the Budget Committee. And a lot of people said, well, that's just scare tactics. I mean, we're going to cut here, we're going to cut here. They're just doing that to scare us. But I don't think that's true. I mean, they seriously are going to have to make some cuts. Alvin Benson said the other day, he said, I've done all I can. I'm almost at the end of my rope in terms of trying to cut people or cut services or whatever. Tony Armstrong at one point said that the 2,400 man police force may be depleted down to 1,900 or whatever. Still no specifics on how that's going to be done. But what has to be done is efficiency. Maybe that's where it really lies. The secret to trying to make all this work is getting things to run a little bit more efficient. Getting civilian people to maybe man phones instead of officers, putting those officers back out on the street. Those are the kind of things I think AC is looking at.
I think they're still having a debate within the administration. I don't think there's agreement within the administration, particularly about the police cuts. And the mayor has acknowledged that you know, this is not everybody on the same page in terms of the discussion about it. I think there's still a heck of a debate within the administration about this.
Yeah, you said something earlier, Les, that was interesting. You talked about the fact that the mayor never mentioned taxes.
Yeah.
Is there a perception by the city council at all that they're the ones that have to take the heat for all this?
Well, yeah, but you know, 10 times during his speech, he brought in the council. He praised the council, working together, we can get this done and all of that. But the council knows. Wanda Halbert said, like immediately after his speech that day, why doesn't he just say it? Why didn't he just say we're going to need to tax and just be honest about it?
And there's another aspect to the mayor's strategy too. You know, he's made a big deal about moving away from the old process of annexation, which Mayor Harrington pursued big time, and focusing on the core city, an infill kind of strategy. What he left unsaid is that the city is so broke that the only way other than taxes to enrich the city is to do what Robert Lipscomb keeps proposing, all these TDZs and TIFs, which bring a lot of state or federal money in. It's kind of like the city's in the situation of someone who's going to go for a deal and get a $50 prepaid Visa card, signing up for a 3-year telephone plan. You know, we get a little money. We got to have something to operate on.
Right.
I don't think the mayor will propose a tax hike to solve this. I believe him when he says it's not on the table. I think that if someone on the council were to do that, which I think is highly unlikely that they will, especially the year after city and county property tax hikes, I think he might be willing to talk about that, but I don't look for him to propose a tax hike on his own.
But can they truly do that through just efficiency? I don't see that. I just don't see it.
Well, hopefully we'll have the mayor on here in the next couple of weeks, and he'll be able to tell us himself. Moving on to our next topic, Governor Bill Haslam on Monday night introduced the Tennessee Promise in his State of the State address. Bill, give us an idea of what that promise is. Some people are calling this pretty bold.
It's very bold, but it's something that several political figures at the state level have talked about in recent years, Republicans and Democrats. The Tennessee Promise is that if you graduate from high school in Tennessee, you will have 2 years of community college, which is an associate degree or some kind of certificate similar to an associate degree. Those 2 years of community college will be absolutely free of charge to you. And it is would be funded through an endowment from the Tennessee Lottery's reserve fund, which is over $400 million. The Tennessee Promise would use all but $110 million of that reserve. And as I said, this is something that has been suggested in various forms as a last dollar scholarship gap funder in the past. And there's certainly Republicans and Democrats in Nashville have had their eye on that lottery reserve over the years for quite some time.
Now, in our last segment, we talked about the benefits, and that was a promise that was made many, many years ago that was discovered that was not sustainable. What are the projections on this? I mean, is this something that 20 and 30 years down the line can still be sustained?
Don't know about 20 or 30 years, but Haslam is clearly thinking of 10, maybe 15 years out in the future. That's about all you can really project realistically, and that's the reason that he went for an endowment, because he said that's the only way that it can be sustained from administration to administration, from one legislative session to another.
I don't think the issue is whether it can be sustained, because people are going to keep on buying lottery tickets. But the problem is, and by the way, I like this plan because I have one daughter who hasn't finished college yet, and she can use this money. But not only did former Senator and now Congressman Steve Cohen, the father of this lottery system, not only did he say, I don't like it, a lot of people associated with the university systems in the state don't like it either, because you're actually taking money from higher education, from a university, from better students who earn Hope Scholarship, and taking that money away and reducing that fund. Now, it's good for a lot of people, not good for some people. The universities are worried about it.
Yeah. He said, Cohen had said that this should hurt the University of Memphis, and he was quite vehement about that. He says because to him, this plan is pushing people toward community colleges rather than four-year institutions.
Because the Hope Scholarships amount in the first 2 years of college would be reduced by $2,000, but the third and fourth years under the Hope Scholarship would be increased by $2,000. And the governor's thinking on that is, okay, it's decreased in the first 2 years of college because you get community college for free. He's trying directly to steer more students into the community college system that the state has. And in his speech, his justification for that was that some Tennesseans are not getting the message that you need some kind of education after high school in order to even be able to hold the new manufacturing jobs that we have. He doesn't think the message is getting through that with these new jobs, these are not the old manufacturing jobs where a high school diploma would do. So it's trying to change a culture in terms of the perception of what higher education is for. And there's going to be a lot of discussion between the 2-year schools and the 4-year schools.
That's right. But yeah, it's far from being a done deal. I mean, you can propose. Bredesen, back in 2006, apparently proposed something similar along this lines, almost the exact thing, and it didn't go anywhere, but in the legislature.
And another objection that Cohen made was that when the Hope Scholarships were founded, $4,000 would take you a fair distance down the line. They don't do that anymore. To cut that sum makes it harder for the Hope Scholarships to be worth something, really.
Interesting. Well, the wine in the grocery stores, that old chestnut came back. I think, how many times have we talked about this on this program? But in any case, Jackson, you're telling me that this is looking pretty good this year.
It is, but I'm wondering if we should be talking about the wine and grocery store bill. We should probably be talking about the newspapers and beer and cigarettes bill for liquor stores, because the liquor stores, their part of the deal is they get to start selling other things right away in July of this year. The grocery stores, and they really tend to be big boxes, maybe some convenience stores, depending on which version of the bill passes. They have to wait 2 years. And if they're within 500 feet of liquor store, they have to wait 3 years before they can start selling wine. And then they can't have loss leaders. Kroger will not have loss leaders, a big sale on beer, because on wine rather, because you have to have at least a 20% markup. The bill insists on that. So the liquor stores are protecting themselves, and they get a fast start on this. The grocery stores have to wait a while.
Well, who wrote this bill? I mean, who had the biggest influence on it being written?
The lobbyists, every lobbyist involved. For all those lobbies, the big box lobbies, you can bet they had input. The liquor stores, you can bet they had input. They've been entrenched on Capitol Hill for a long time.
Now, we were talking earlier this week, and you told me that the last time it failed by one vote in committee. Yeah. How's it look this time?
It looks pretty good. It's passed all the relevant subcommittees. It's passed the Senate. And a somewhat different version in the House has passed all the relevant subcommittees. It'll go before House Finance next week and probably pass. The question is whether you're going to have the House bill, which requires 2,000 square feet to sell wine, and has a somewhat higher license fee, or the Senate bill, which allows convenience stores in on the game, really, and it has a license fee equivalent to what liquor stores pay. The House bill makes it a little harder to do. The Senate bill is more relaxed. Somewhere in there, they'll compromise.
Who was opposed to it the last time that kind of turned?
Well, the liquor lobby, clearly,
yeah,
and the
liquor
preachers, the unholy or holy alliance, depending on which side of it you want to see. But again, the liquor lobby has been bought off because they've got this fast start and they get to sell more things themselves. And they can't be undersold by big box sales.
I see. Okay, well, we'll look at that with interest and see if it actually passes this time, because if I remember correctly, a year ago at this point, we were thinking that the last one was going to pass.
Somebody's vote changed is what happened.
Somebody's vote changed. Okay, well, we'll watch for that too. On the chopping block this week for the Shelby County School Board were as many as 13 schools. It was an extremely emotional subject. Some parents even acknowledging that some of the schools have to be closed. They just don't want it to be their kids' school. Well, so let's talk a little bit about that. So, how is that going?
It's always an emotional process. It's one of the most emotional decisions that any school board can make. And the interesting thing is that there is much more emotion and public outcry involved when you're talking about closing high schools than when you're talking about closing an elementary or a middle school. It's kind of funny how that works out, but there's this emotional attachment to high schools. At any rate, Shelby County Schools has a list of 13 schools, elementary, middle, and high schools, that Superintendent Dorsey Hobson wants the board to debate and consider closing. He's not made a final recommendation at this point. That's the board's process. So the public hearings have moved to the schools that are affected themselves this week and last week, and the board will probably vote at its meeting either at the end of this month or at the end of March. And there are always changes in the list to some degree, the way this has worked in the past. Usually one or two schools drop off of it. And Hobson's plea to the communities has been pretty basic and direct. These schools have low enrollment, these schools have low student performance, and if you can show me a plan that says you have a way to help turn that around in both cases, then maybe my recommendation will not include your school. I'm willing to work with you, but you got to show me something here. And the interesting thing is, these are not schools that are totally bereft of community support in every case. Alsea Elementary School has 10 or 11 adopters or people who have, from the outside, who have programs within the school. Yet it's on the block, and it's been on the block before. So you really have a fundamentally different way of looking at these schools from the supporters and from the school's administration. The supporters of these schools see potential for those schools to be rescued. The school system looks at them and says, maybe, but if it was going to happen, why hasn't it happened by now?
Yeah, and you talked about, Bill, it always seems to be more emotion attached when it's a high school. And Northside High School is one of those on that chopping block. I was at my barbershop on Saturday, and a woman came through getting a petition, trying to get people to sign and all that. And you wonder, though, why couldn't this effort have been done earlier on the part of those parents who really felt, what they're doing now. Why weren't they out a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago? I mean, if they knew that. The devastating thing, I did a story last year about Florida Elementary that used to be. You go to that neighborhood now, everything around it, the houses are boarded up. What a school does is it brings the community together. It becomes a hub. You take that school away, you close it down, you close down that community. And that is the saddest part of it, of it all.
That's the problem. They're just not cost effective, but it does injure the community when they have to be closed, no question.
But can the school system be expected to shoulder the entire weight of bringing
Exactly.
that
Right.
community back? That's really the question that the school system and the school board are dealing with.
They can't afford to be social engineers, is what it comes down to.
Well, of course, all this news was mitigated by some good news, relatively good news for the Shelby County school system, and that was the free lunch program, as I understand it.
Right, but plans are already underway for the next school year, which is going to be another historic school year for the school system on many fronts. But yeah, free breakfast, lunch, and dinner will be offered under a federal program that is used in several other school systems that have a very high percentage of students already who are on the free and reduced lunch federal program, where you have income guidelines for it. And this has been in the works for at least a couple of years, simply because most of the students in the school system are on the free lunch program. And the thinking is that the cost of administering that are so high that if you go to a totally free lunch program where you only report the number of meals served, as opposed to all of the other bureaucratic stuff that's there now, that you actually make it possible to have free lunches for everyone.
Well, let's move on to the fact that it's the political season, and or it's about to rev up here, and I find myself, it's kind of funny to even say that, considering the fact that it seems like we have an election every 15 minutes here in Shelby County. But Jackson, you've been keeping a close eye on this. What are some of the more interesting races that you've been able to discern?
Well, first of all, I want to point out this is the big ballot year because all the judges are up. All the trial judges are up, so it's bigger than usual. But Bill and I were in a meeting last night, the Shelby County Democratic Executive Committee, where we saw one of the more interesting races being formed. That's the race for Shelby County Mayor. Now, Mark Luttrell is a Republican incumbent, and he's pretty optimistic about re-election, but the Democrats think that their theoretical numerical majority in Shelby County gives them a chance. So 4 people so far are trying, well, maybe more than 4 major candidates are trying so far to get the Democratic nomination. Deidre Malone, former commissioner, has been declared for a while. Steve Mulroy declared this week, another Shelby County commissioner. James Harvey, the chairman of the commission, is declared, and Kenneth Whalum, who is a famous school board member.
Yes.
And between the 4 of those guys, we should have a very interesting race. A lot of energy last night at this meeting. And another interesting race is the one for Attorney General.
Well, the one thing I was going to say is I've been noticing that Kenneth Whalum has been kind of expanding his, his view of various things. He's not just the school board. He's weighing in on various issues in the city. For a while, I was wondering if he was going to run for mayor of Memphis.
Well, his appetite was whetted when he thinks he single-handedly defeated the sales tax referendum last year, and he was instrumental in doing that, no question about it.
And he still got that lawsuit to get back on the school board.
Yeah.
That's still pending out.
He may be back on the school board, in fact, but unless he's elected mayor in the meantime. And the other interesting race that's forming up again on the Democratic side, because the Republicans have all the incumbencies right now, because they had this big wipeout in 2010. Attorney General, that race is going to be very interesting. Amy Wyrick, of course, is a Republican incumbent. And she's pretty optimistic about re-election because she, like Luttrell, had a lot of Democratic crossover. Now, that has stuck in the craw of some Democrats. It's stuck in the craw of one would-be candidate, Carol Chumney, the former legislator and council member, who's made a big deal about chastising Democrats who didn't support her when she ran for that office 2 years ago, when Amy won the right to continue the term, Bill Gibbons' term. And we have another possible entry, Judge Joe Brown.
Yes,
And he was
from the syndicated series.
Yeah, he was fire and brimstone last night. He made so many charges. I was telling Bill earlier, we couldn't report them all because they have to be very highly investigated about people in power. But it was a kind of a cat and mouse game between him and Carol Chumney because he's not declared, although he's talking about running. She hasn't even mentioned it, but you know she's thinking about running. And they each had an eye on each other. Is he going to do it? Is she going to do it? One of them is likely to do it. Probably Carol. I don't see Joe Brown doing it.
I think it's a lot of hot air on Joe Brown's part.
If they don't, at this point, we're 2 weeks from the filing deadline for the May county primaries.
Yeah, September 20th, yeah.
And the Democrats have no one who's even pulled a petition in that race as of the taping of this show on Friday morning.
I see.
So if it's going to happen, it needs to happen soon.
Right.
They were floating balloons is what they were doing, both
Right.
of those two. And there are a lot of interesting commission races because we had the 13 single-member districts for the first time, and a lot of new faces and a few of the old faces who are not term limited who can run. Those are good races.
The white male Democrat, he is like, that's what they want. The guy that's straight off and gone, voted Republican on occasion or whatever because he didn't like the party's people. Well, that's the guy they got to get out. To
Well, that's
vote
right.
Democrat.
That's why you've got Mike McCusker running for criminal court clerk. That's
That's
why you've
right.
got Mulward running for mayor.
And it's also why I think that the party is in the midst of a really interesting discussion to try to reconcile what happened to them 4 years ago when they lost every countywide race to
There
the
were the usual
Republicans.
charges last night. It was stolen from them, but it probably won't.
Well, quickly, this has been a big week for the Beatles because this is the 50th anniversary. Quickly, in the 30 seconds that we have left, Jackson, you were at the Coliseum.
I
when
covered that concert back
Yeah.
in 1908, whatever, 1966. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
It was a long time ago. But as long as Paul McCartney's still holding up, I can too. And it was one of those concerts you couldn't hear anything because of the screaming of the audience, but you could tell they were doing good.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Good night.